We're live. Welcome, everyone, to the Google Hangout on Design and New Technology. Joe Matthew, Corey Kidd, Skip Walter are our guests. I'm Patrick Whitney at the Institute of Design. And we're going to have an hour discussion on what's happening with the emerging technology. The background for this is our strategy conference, which is May 19th and 20th. Has traditionally asked two big questions: why, where companies need to play, and how are they going to win? And we've brought executives and thought leaders in to talk about that. This year we've decided to dive deeper because we think there are underlying tectonic changes happening that change the nature of those two big questions: where to play and how to win. And technology is certainly one of those. So starting with Joe, if each of you could comment on the emerging technologies you see most influential on society and why design is relevant to making them effective. Joe, would you comment on that?
Sure. I have been playing, so my name is Joe Matthew. I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Design. I'm also the founder and CEO of a new startup called Vermont, where our hope is to build connections between physical spaces and stories that people like to tell. And this really goes back to the question that Patrick was asking, that, what are the changes that we're seeing? One of the big changes that we're seeing is that it's now possible through the advent of mobile technology, hyperlocal communications, very strong virtual augmented reality experiences, that we are now able to look through physical infrastructure into what I call the information layer of the city. It used to be, we used to create a lot of information, we used to create a lot of narratives associated with the city, but at this point we now have amazing technology that enables us to reach out and grab that information and associate ourselves with it. So that's one big change that I'm seeing.
Great. We'll come back to that. Corey, could you talk about your view of what's emerging and why design can make a difference?
Certainly. So my name is Corey Kidd. I'm the founder and CEO of Catalia Health, and we're focused on helping patients engage over the long term with managing treatment. So kind of a big picture trend that we've seen for decades now is the fact that healthcare is something that obviously grows more and more important as, on average, we become an older population. However, the number of doctors, nurses, and other caregivers hasn't grown. So I've been working for almost 20 years now in building technology to help us as we age. And as a broad I'm going to give two quick answers. So the first one is the broad answer. So healthcare technology overall is becoming much, much more important. As technology goes into many different parts of our lives, I think the impact that it can have on healthcare has come about a little bit slower than it has on social interaction or online commerce, but it's becoming more and more important, and I think that's the very broad answer, and where I see design starting to play a bigger and bigger role. I think the leading healthcare technology companies start with design as a basic tenet and principle that the company is built around. And I'll also quickly give a specific answer, because I'm sure we'll come back and touch on this in the next hour. But over the last 15 years, I've used interactive robots as a part of what we're doing. And I think that the reason for using a robot in many of our applications is fundamentally different from doing something on a screen, because of the psychology of the way that we think about interacting with other people. And so I think that's a big component of the kind of technology that I've been working on for the last 15 years. Design, of course, has been an incredibly important part of that in terms of how we not only construct the physical robot, but its interaction with people in their everyday lives. I think is something that's incredibly important. There are a growing number of people working in this area, but it's still relatively small, but I think that's something that we'll see change over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, when I was in your office and workshop, it seemed that some of the robots almost seemed cute.
Yeah, that's a very important piece of it, yes.
Yeah, it was interesting. Skip, your thoughts. What's emerging, why design?
sorry, I'm mostly interested in collaboration these days, and in particularly how you collaborate across time and distance. So the technologies that are enabling that clearly start with the iPhone, smartphone introduction. As everything gets smaller, more powerful, things like higher resolution displays, batteries become important. And I'm interested very much in how that shows up in VR, virtual reality, and augmented reality and mixed reality, but also how that shows up in the sensor technology. And so with a group of researchers, one of the things we're looking at is something we're calling wide field ethnography, which is how do you combine these multiple streams of data. So analytics is another key component of this and the importance of the cloud. But we have so much more of data available to us in streams. How do we make that analysis and how do we use it so that technology can be a valued collaborator in teams, with meetings, and in physical spaces?
So Bill Joy wrote an article about probably 10 years ago now, questioning the advancement of computer science. This is from the co-founder of Sun Computing, saying that the technology was getting to a state where it was hard to understand, and that technology was being used to write new code and develop new computing capability, which was getting further away from people and harder to understand. Each of you have touched on things that, in a sense, make the technology a little more humane. Could each of you take one aspect that you're close to and talk about the dimensions of making it more more compatible with the way people live? We'll leave Bill Joy's polemic off to the side yet and come back to that. But Corey, when you think of the user experience with something like AI and robots, what goes through your mind, or what do you learn from watching users that goes beyond my glib remark about cuteness?
So a lot of what we think about actually comes from the worlds of psychology and medicine. You know, there is a robot that's the interface that people see. There is the cuteness of that, and the advantage of that is, you know, obviously it draws you in, right? It helps to not scare someone off the first time they see your technology.
And it's disarming.
It is, exactly, right? You know, the same way a pet might be, right? They're not scary at first glance. Really what we're doing, most of the work is at the intersection, like I said, of psychology, medicine, and artificial intelligence. So how do we create conversations that are appropriate for that person at that point in time? And so, you know, starting with what does this particular user, or in our case, we call our users patients, right? We're in healthcare. What does this particular patient need at this point in time, and what's the best way to deliver the information to that individual? So those are really the kind of foundational questions that we build everything upon. And I think when you take that approach, whether it's in the kinds of things that we're building in robotics and healthcare, or really any other thing that you're designing to interact with the user. I mean, this is not a new concept. I think just with the kind of technology that we're building and the advances more broadly in technology for understanding spoken language, having a computer or a robot speak back to me, you know, or maybe it's Siri or, you know, Google Now on my phone, you know, using any of these things, combining that with the psychology and a deep understanding of the human relationship with technology, I think allows us to personalize and personify this kind of technology and really adapt it to the individual user in ways that has been very difficult to do before.
So you can embed your ideas and the technology of AI and robotics and the knowledge of medicine into standalone robotics that are these nice objects that sit on the desk or on the floor. You could also embed it into the services and environment and not have it be embodied as a humanoid or a petnoid object. What are your thoughts on the embodiment of it, whether it should disappear into the environment or whether it should be little creatures like you're making, or both?
So I think it really depends on the application and what you're trying to do with it and where you're trying to use it. You know, over the last couple of decades, I've definitely built both. 15 plus years ago, I was working on a lot of technology that was designed to be embedded in the home environment. In that case, there may be a simple interface or no interface, and the technology was more hidden. In the case of what we're doing now at Catalia Health, the robot, the physical embodiment, actually makes a difference, coming back to the psychology of face-to-face versus mediated interaction. You know, had it been logistically easy, we would all be sitting face-to-face in a room having this discussion instead of on a hangout, right? When we're separated by these cameras and screens, it makes a difference. You know, we intuitively get that, but psychologically that difference is when we're face-to-face, we're more engaged with the person that we're talking to. We find them more trustworthy, more credible, more informative. Again, it just goes back to basic psychology of interaction. And the reason for using the physical robot and the kinds of things that we're doing is you start to get some of those effects of face-to-face interaction that you can never get with just a screen. And the kinds of things that we're building are designed to help patients engage for months or years. I mean, we're working in a lot of chronic diseases and end-of-life treatments, and it's really important for our applications to make sure that we engage that patient for a long period of time. So in this case, that embodiment is important, but the general concepts in terms of the AI that can help adapt conversations to a particular individual can certainly apply across a lot of different interfaces, or lack thereof, as we move more and more towards speech interfaces and our kind of conception now of an interface being something on a screen is something that's starting to go away.
Right. So I'm going to switch to Anijo now. The embedding media, embedding content and interaction into the physical environment or into things that stand separately from it, like books and films, etc., is an interesting question. What strikes me about your work is you're treating the environment as a medium. You're almost not using a metaphor. You're getting directly to the pictures helping people tell stories through the real world. Could you comment on that? Could you build that idea about the environment as medium and not using metaphors?
So Patrick, as Corey was talking, I was thinking about a class that I teach called Extensions of Media and Technology. And the class, essentially, the 60% of the class is reading Marshall McLuhan and his writings and trying to decipher what he was trying to say in his writings. And so in one of the most impressive moments in the class is when the students realize what Marshall McLuhan means by a technology being both an amputation and an extension of our body. And I think that for long we have focused on the extensions of technology, and we have forgotten that they also amputate our ability to do things. So as Corey was talking, I was thinking about how we sort of fetishize technology as an object and as an external thing. And the power of what design can do is to understand what human relations look like and how we can catalyze those, right? And this could be in the form of objects that are present, or it could be in the form of invisible objects. In my case, my research looks into how the environment, the cities that we live in, the places, the homes, they can become a catalyst for the interaction between two or more human beings. So what does it mean when my daughter is able to come back to the places that she grew up in Chicago and put her ears, not physically, but an extension of her ear. So this could be in the form of headphones, it could be in the form of phones, it could be in the form of augmented technology that we haven't yet invented 20 years into the future. And what happens when she can put her ears to the walls of the house that we used to live in and somehow listen to the voices that existed there 20 years ago when she was 6 years old, right?
So to take a little longer to explain that, I'm not sure, it's a very different use. Right. You're saying that she actually is using the house as the source of content?
Correct. So the house itself becomes a source of interaction with memories and narratives that used to exist there. So today what I'm doing is I'm capturing these narratives. So I'm capturing the narratives of her. She's only 6 years old, so she can, I have videos and audio files and pictures and text and all of these things that I'm collecting now. And so, one video that's particularly endearing is her first steps. And we were living in a Ukrainian village, and she took her first steps in that part of town, right? So we have a video of her walking on the street, and there's a powerful connection between the human being that she is and the environment that she is connected to. So because it's the first time a 1.5-year-old comes into contact with the city, right, at a physical level. So I take that video and at this moment, I embed it into that physical location, that street in Ukrainian village. And then through the platform that we've built, so one of the hopes one of the things that we've built into the platform, Vermont, is this ability for people to lock content. So in the platform, I can lock it. So she has to physically be back in that location to unlock that video. She has to physically be back in that location, but the only time that she can unlock it is after she turns 25. So there's a location lock, an age lock, and I can put any number of locks on this. So now environment itself becomes a part of the narrative. It's not a mute participant, it becomes an active participant. But going back to what I was talking about with Marshall McLuhan, I think what we are starting to see is the receding of technology to the background. So it is a connection between the human being and other human beings, either people who are physically present there or people who are not co-located. Like in Corey's case, it could be a healthcare provider who's not co-located, but there's a connection. But the technology itself is just a layer that helps you to connect them. In my case, this is a connection between 2 human beings or 3 human beings. So my wife, myself, and my daughter, except my wife and I may no longer be alive at that time. Well, hopefully we will be, but we may no longer be alive. And my daughter can still have a connection to us because of the locations that we have or the environment that we used to exist in together.
So it's like a memory machine in that context. You're talking about things going into the background or foreground is interesting. I've seen 5 generations of Samsung smart home. And they all look different, but they all require you to come in and do really natural things like yell to an empty room that I'm home. And when you look at all the ways you have to manipulate blinds and coffee machines and refrigerators and air conditioners, etc., I think, how hard is it to set the settings on a smartphone? What would it be like to set the settings to customize your smart home? Right.
Are you familiar? I mean, in my class, I talk about this idea of the electricity girls. Have I talked to you about this?
No.
Let me explain anyway. So at the turn of the last century, when electricity first started to enter into the homes, nobody really knew what to do with electricity. They didn't realize that they could light up their lives and illuminate and, power electrical appliances. Nobody knew. So what rich English and American patrons would do is they would throw these parties, and in these parties they would invite other rich people. And this is a time when the houses were illuminated with gas lanterns, and gas was a primary source of energy. Coal was a primary source of energy. And they would invite these guests, and they would have what are known as electricity girls. And these are young women who they would invite to become waitresses or servers, but they would string them with electrical conduits and put them on roller skates. I'm not making any of this up. This is Adrian Forty who wrote this in a book. They would put electrical conduits on the roller skates and then put electrical wiring on the floor. So every time they tripped the wiring, they would start glowing because there were lights on their bodies. These were the electricity girls of the the turn of the 20th century. So in some sense, we are at the age of the electricity girls with computing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that today's event like that might be a hackathon, or some other event that comes together to amplify the capability of the technology, not sure what the outcome is going to be. Skip, you've been in the world of communication from your early days at DEC, certainly through Aldus and Adobe and through your various startups, and you seem to be staying in that area now of collaboration. Can you talk about why design is relevant to that aspect of this technology?
I'm holding up Ricoh Theta S, which I got in November, which is a VR camera with 2 lenses on it. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of technology-centric design and supports no known use case or user trying to do anything at all. But in spite of that, I have been recording as much as I can with the device. And one of the things I recorded was over Christmas, as we were waiting our 4th grandchild, my wife sent some ornaments for the Christmas tree because we're going to hold Christmas there. And I happened to be there when my 3-year-old granddaughter opened up the set of ornaments from the plastic bag. And I happened to have the device sitting on the floor recording what was going on, processed it, and sent it to my wife. Now, we've been sending videos and doing FaceTime and using standard iPhone kind of movies, and we all kind of nod, we're glad to see the grandkids. But something fundamental happened when I sent the VR to my wife, and she had control of what she could see. So she could look at Hazel, she could look at me, she could look at our daughter and our son-in-law as we moved around the space. And I immediately got a call, and she's in tears of, this is the first time I felt like I could control my attention when I'm watching what's going on with the grandkids. And we saw something completely different in that simple interaction. Well, this is the kind of thing we've been doing for the last 2 years of recording everything we can in sort of the big productivity sink of any business, which is the conference room, and looking at what's going on in there and how can we be more effective and efficient with today's tools. One of the things we found after watching several hundred hours of professional meetings was the role of laughter. And what we found is, much like Google Photos does with creating stories out of your photos and movies, is if you, when you identify a piece of laughter, if you'll back the video up about 30 seconds, that's where the insights in the meetings are. Because generally, laughter is a result of 2 incongruous things smashing together in the moment. And so with about less than 4 or 5 minutes of video, you capture all of the insights that show up in a meeting just by paying attention to the laughter. And so one of my colleagues recently published a paper about how to do the mathematics of identifying laughter in a stream. So now we have the capability to actually do that quick summary. When we translate that to VR, and now I have the ability to look wherever I want in the meeting, pay attention to whoever I want, it's a very different experience than watching a fixed camera, or even if there's a cameraman, somebody else controlling what I observe, versus how I would act in a normal meeting if I had that capability. And that's certainly what my wife experienced with Hazel, is just a completely different emotional context once she had the ability to see the whole space and control what it is that she viewed.
So I would like to build on this idea and have all 3 of you comment on the role of, changing role of interaction, to see if you agree or not, and what your thoughts are. In interaction, I think, is changing from being an interactive way to go down different paths of content, how it started. The choices are pretty well described. To the area of social media, where people are creating their own stuff, the maker movement hits content. But wading through that stuff is often painful, and the business model is still using one of the old world of mass media of advertising. Let's for a moment say that or my conjecture is that people making stuff, people that we once saw the recipients are now makers. How is that going to change things? It's almost not a technological issue, it's a point of view issue. When people aren't just responding to stuff that you put out there, but are by consuming it, but are making it and putting it out there themselves, it seems to me it changes the rules of the game. Does that make any sense to any of you? Anajo, do you want to comment?
We speak about this a lot in my work at ID and in the startup, is this transformation of users and from being consumers of content to producers of content. I mean, if you look at the new generation of digitally savvy, I mean, I hate the word millennials because it presupposes an age, but it's actually people who are digitally savvy, people who are much more comfortable with the technological aspect of life, are much more in tune with the production aspect than they are with the consumption aspect, which has led to the growth of these social media platforms. And in a sense, what they're saying, what the platforms tell us as academics, is that it's no longer enough for organizations or businesses to continue to produce something. You have to have your user as an equal, if not joint participant in the conversation, so that you can build together.
Yeah. So Corey, in healthcare, we've seen this new phenomena since the web came out of patients walking in with reams of data about their illness, much of it irrelevant, some of it relevant, all of it important to the consumer, overwhelming the doctor with information the doc hasn't had time to look at. Are you, and also separately from them walking in with reams of paper, there's this feeling that people have to take more responsibility for their own health. How are you dealing with that, or how is your industry dealing with that, or is it dealing with that at all?
It's trying to deal with that, and I think that there are a bunch of changes happening in parallel here. So one is, like you say, the ability to collect a lot of data, and you're right, most of it is irrelevant, the data itself. But the analysis of that data, you might be able to do something interesting with, and that's been the concept behind this kind of quantified self. One of the names for this quantified self movement for the last 5 or 10 years is, if I can collect this data, there must be some meaning in it, right? So I'm gonna grab all the data. Now I know how many steps I took every day, and how many minutes I slept last night, and how restless my sleep was, and things that, again, with the data itself are pretty much pointless and irrelevant or useless. But now we're starting to get to the point where we can make sense of some of that data. And I think that's the next interesting trend is, if in the context of healthcare, if I'm a producer of data, right, which all of us are, most of us don't collect that data now, but give me tools to do something meaningful with that. So, let's take the next step now from, a device I can carry on me that tells me how many steps I've taken in a day, to, what that means for my overall health, or maybe something that measures my heart rate or heart rate variability throughout the day, something that's kind of catching on now among a small group of people, and tell me what that means about my health and give me some actionable insight. And I think these are really slow trends to happen. A lot of us think of Fitbit as kind of the original activity tracker, and I know back in about 16 years ago, I was wearing one called SportBrain out of the UK, which was, one of the first internet-connected ones where you had to put in a little base station that had a modem in it, uploaded your data, and unfortunately, it just takes us a very long time to understand what that data means. But I think that we've seen this mostly, obviously, in social media, the ability for anyone to create content. And I think what we're seeing there is when you make it really easy for people to do it, you have people engaging at very different levels. Some people remain only consumers, right? Even if I have the ability to create content. Some people are at the opposite extreme and, posting new things all the time, writing things, taking pictures, videos. And you have a lot of people in the middle where they are semi-active participants. They do a lot of consumption. They'll create something once in a while. And I expect that we'll see similar trends in healthcare. I think it's too early to tell, but some of us will be producing and analyzing data that really go deeply into understanding our health and our conditions. And others will be the recipients of the outcomes of that. And I think the place that we've seen this most so far is through sites that let patients with specific diseases talk about them. And I think there have been some interesting insights medically that have actually come out of this. And again, it's this intersection of what we think of as social media and healthcare that allow patients to become much more involved in their own treatments.
Yeah, to make it even more complicated, a single person is going to operate in those different modes of producer, consumer, and in the middle in different contexts.
Absolutely, and probably don't even think of the difference between them, right? As technology, which enables us, becomes more and more a part of our lives, we don't really think about switching roles. It's just the way that we use our technology.
Right. But let's talk about control for a little bit in your area. How much of the guidance goes from your robots to the patient, and how much control does the patient have over the robot?
So that's an interesting question. I think something that we're constantly struggling with and trying to figure out. Ultimately the patient has control of all of their data, all of their conversations. They choose whether or not to have a conversation with the robot. If we look at, since we're deploying this first in the U.S. by U.S. law, patients have a lot of control over their data and whether we can keep and or use any of it. Patients ultimately decide whether to opt in or opt out to using a platform like this. The robot can drive the conversation. The artificial intelligence is always analyzing what's going on with the patient medically and psychologically and determining when to suggest a certain thing, when to have a certain kind of conversation, when to report data back to the doctor. But again, ultimately the patient has the final say and control. Whether or not the patient chooses, whether we choose to exercise that is another question. In other words, I can use a platform like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Ultimately, I can typically delete my account or remove everything so that other people can't see it. So I have that control, but most of us never exercise that, right? So we're willing to engage in that kind of stream of information on an ongoing basis.
What about
Patrick?
Yes, go ahead.
So one thing that Corey's point of view reminded me of is this. I mean, we're all familiar with the idea of APIs. And at ID, we talk about the emergence of the human API. This is not a term that we coined, but it has been out there, but we use it a lot. The human API is the fact that we as human beings, as a society, have enabled organizations, medical organizations, healthcare organizations, even Nike, a commercial organization, to put sensors on our body to become a plugin for interactive decision-making at their end. And this is a transformation that we have seen in the last maybe decade, 2 decades. We are now, as a society, we are willing to put sensors on our body without even, like Corey was saying, without a knowledge of what the ramification of this is, in the hope that these organizations are making benevolent decisions for us. This is a transformational period.
It is, and what's interesting about it is, if you look at it from the point of view of the doctor or from the Nike or any industry, you end up looking normally as a very narrow view of the person, whereas if you look at it from the person's view, you get a much broader view. Take the robots again for healthcare. If a person is sick at home, they may want to communicate with their adult children who are living across the country, where their adult children want to make sure that their elderly parents are taking the right medicine, or they might want to have lunch delivered to them. Right now, from an industry point of view, in healthcare, I haven't seen anything that deals with human well-being. They deal with the healthcare aspect of it. because it's the people in the healthcare industry looking at it. Corey, do you see any experiments going on in looking at the broader nature of health and well-being from the patient's point of view rather than the industry's point of view?
Absolutely, and I think the industry is actually coming around to that point of view in many cases. You know, we work with kind of a broad cross-section of the healthcare industry, from big pharma to integrated health systems to individual caregivers. And I think one of the big trends that we see is, you know, not only the acknowledgement of the importance of that, but actually trying to put that into action. You know, so we get to work with a lot of integrated health providers. And by the nature of what we're doing, the more innovative ones. And so, you know, they're certainly probably at the cutting edge of this thinking, but trying to, you know, take the concept of overall health and wellness as beneficial to the patient, to the healthcare system, to, you know, the families around that individual, and really promoting that as, you know, a part of overall wellness. And I think that we are seeing a trend in that direction, and technology helps to enable that. So one of the challenges in healthcare is, you know, going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, just simply utilization, right? As we get older, more and more of us are dealing with chronic disease. The number of caregivers we have is not, you know, is not going to keep going up as a percentage of the population. So we have to find ways to be more effective. Now, the first thing that's happened, though, is it just means if I want to go see my doctor, instead of, you know, a half an hour I might have gotten 20 or 30 years ago, you know, 10 years ago got 15 minutes. I think today the average visit's around 7 minutes. So I don't get any time with that person. Using technology to take care of some of the more mundane things a doctor might be doing, collecting that data, for example, so I don't have to sit there and spend 5 of my 7 minutes answering questions that, you know, my doctor's going to put in my record, so she could actually spend 2 minutes then talking to me about why I came in. You know, using technology to do things like that, or the follow-up care that's simply a reminder to, you know, take a pill or measure my blood pressure, or, you know, get up and do my rehab therapy, whatever it might be. You know, using technology to enable that, I think, lets us, you know, humanize the healthcare system and use people, us, in a way that's much more effective.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Skip, for getting us going down that stream of conversation. I'd like to shift a little bit. Some people argue, particularly if they're in the Valley, that technology is the catalyst to change and people catch up to where it's going. Another view that I would like to put forward and have your responses to is that what we do is race forward towards a new technology. We race forward while we're looking backwards. We see the technological capabilities in terms of what they can do with our life today, frequently in making it more efficient or faster or cheaper. But it takes a long time for us to discover what the new technology is really for. So, for example, Anna Jo's example of electrification of homes, when they put the first electrical sockets in homes, they put one in the living room and thought that would provide the needs for the house. It took a long time before electricity became a normal part of life. What do you see? Do you see this dilemma of us, the situation of where we're looking backwards as we're racing forwards, and what can we do to align those two things with our needs and our capabilities faster and with less pain than what we normally do? Of course, feel free to disagree with the conjecture as well.
Well, I think from my standpoint, one of the things that I've enjoyed about the association with the Institute of Design is that I realize there's more than enough technology to solve just about any problem. What there isn't is a good understanding of what human needs are. So in some sense that's an agreement, but it's also why I see so many people shifting more and more to, okay, what are the needs here? And we were stunned a couple months ago when Qualcomm came to us and said, we'd like to do a 5-year strategy and have it be a human-centered strategy for where this AR stuff is going, because we've had so many challenges with doing technologies that don't go anywhere. We want to start from the other side and say, what are the needs 5, 10 years out that this kind of augmented reality technology is going to be good for? So I think that's the exciting part, is seeing that change now occurring of what are the needs, and then what technologies do we have to bring to bear on it. I think the other thing that we forget, and virtual reality is a great example, and Kevin Kelly just had a terrific article in Wired, looking back 30 years, VR was a technology 30 years ago that was just around the corner. But it's taken hundreds of technology developments for that to get to the point where we now can see it being useful. But what's still missing is we're coming at it as a technology versus understanding that our world is just doing a huge McLuhan shift in the Gutenberg galaxy sense, from being about pages, being about a world driven by pages, to one that's now going to be driven by places. So we're going back, in a sense, to place where all of human history was, but it was a singular place where I could travel in my lifetime, to now being a world of many places that I can visit. So design now, interaction design, technology, is really about how do I deal with place. So that's what I loved with what Anija was talking about with environments, and environment as the medium. We're calling it something different, a PSEC, a PSEC, which is a physical, social, economic, cyber environment. And what I love, and what the maker movement has demonstrated, is how small teams can really design for that whole space. And what I missed a couple years ago is how far ahead the NFL is in understanding what a PSEC should really be about. They've instrumented now with RFIDs in every single player, so that you can look at, for example, the play is designed on the Microsoft Surface that's sitting on the sideline. The play is executed, and you immediately have video overlaid from all the sensors on all the players for how they actually executed both the offense and the defense on that play. Clearly, they've got a heck of an economic engine, but the social aspect comes in, and what Kevin Kelly nicely pointed out was that we're getting more social with these technologies, and Anija talked about it earlier, about the users producing content, and I suspect the same thing will happen in the health and well-being space. But now, as a designer, as an interaction designer, with the low costs, I can design physical, social, economic, and cyber systems.
I forget which librarian of Congress said that with every new development of communication media, we decrease the quality of communication between people. And we may be approaching a world where people can make things back, that it may actually start to turn that around. And Joe, do you have comments about this racing forward while looking backwards?
Patrick, the honest response to your question is I don't think we can stop the transformation that is driven by technology. I mean, I think you're in some sense referring to the Norman article about how innovation is driven by technology, not design, and design's role is to sort of follow the path or the footsteps of technology. Personally, I am actually, in the last few years, I am actually more and more, and less worried about how we are racing forward with technology, and more and more interested in our alums and students and other designers becoming integrators of the great technology that's out there. So one of my big claims that I make is that it's not the role of the designer to invent new things. And in fact, we are really terrible inventors for that matter. I mean, some of us have done really well, but most of us are really terrible at inventing something. But what we are really good at is integrating new technologies. So if we leave the role of the invention to the engineer, and if we respect the engineering community and if we respect the technology community for building new ideas and constantly keeping us on our toes, what we can do is look at the human side and say, here's how human beings are going to use this technology. Take AR and VR, for example. We are at the cusp of some major changes in our lives, and yet what we have are terrible interfaces that are driven by engineering. But it's important that they drive that, because then we can look at it and be critical of it and start creating amazing experiences that take that and build on top of it. And it's really important that we prototype these experiences, and I don't disagree with you, but I think we have to appreciate the movement of engineering to just keep creating things and launching things.
And Joe, could you check your mic connection? Your voice is breaking up a bit. Corey, do you have comments on this?
I think something just brief, which is that history clearly shows us, as we've had many examples in the last few minutes pointed out, that really understanding how we're going to use a new technology or a new medium is something that in rare cases takes years, usually takes decades, and sometimes takes centuries. And going back to what we were talking about a moment ago in terms of the democratization of creation, whether that be content or new technologies, hopefully will help us speed that up. But I think the reality is, diffusing innovation throughout our lives and for many people is still going to take a long time. I think that there are always going to be a few people who are on the cutting edge and finding what everyone is going to use a new technology for years or decades in the future, but there will probably still remain a small number of people while we're exploring many different options. And I think whether we're talking about location or mobile or robotics or any of these areas, the way that we use any of these in 20 years is going to be probably surprising to any of us who are sitting here talking today as relative experts in the field. It changes constantly, and it's very difficult to predict which thing will take off because there are so many factors beyond the technology that really help to make that decision.
Yeah, I think it's, given your comment and Joe's recent comment, I think it's very important to point out the difference between invention and innovation, and we should celebrate the various inventions that people make, technological and otherwise. But I'm reminded of Ford's new company. Ford has just asked Jim Hackett to become, who's the former CEO of Steelcase, and who brought, with Rob Pugh, brought design to Steelcase in a very strong way. They've asked Jim to head a new company which is called Mobility, and it's looking at the whole issue of mobility not being limited to cars and trucks. And so they're open to services, they're open to helping people get things at home by making them at home itself. Just what normally we move things around with cars and trucks, they're saying forget cars and trucks for this division. We'll look at it more broadly. And that leaves them able to start from the opposite end of the direction of what do people need and look into the pool of capabilities in the world and assemble the ones that are needed. Skip, do you have anything you want to add to this issue of control?
I think it's the critical piece of these new technologies, and that's what I was trying to illustrate a little bit with my wife watching the VR video of Hazel, is just that ability to control where my attention is, like I would when I'm face to face, is a key bit of what's going on. And that's what I loved about what Corey was saying with what they're doing with some of the robotics and creating these interfaces so that the user can be in control in a very different way than they've been with technology in the past. So I think that whole bit of interaction, both the ability to produce versus just consume, and the ability to, and I love the notion of integrate as a designer, but with a much larger scope. This whole notion of physical, social, economic, cyber is a small team can really design something that involves all of those.
Mm-hmm. Next week we're having a discussion about the changing nature of graduate design education. As you three think of, as each of you think of the future and the way you would like designers to interact with the new world of technology, what hints or glimpses do you have about what you think design education should do? Corey, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So over the last 8 years now, I've off and on taught graduate design courses in social robotics and understanding what's going on in that world. And this is, you know, I of course always use some healthcare examples, but try to position it much more broadly and thinking through a lot of these questions of how might we use this technology in the future. And I think from that perspective, really digging into, you know, the human-robot interaction aspects of this, which again for me comes back to basic psychology and understanding how and why people would interact with something like this, and what is, you know, how is that going to change over time, and, you know, really getting these graduate students to look at the intersection of these different pieces. You know, I think this is where we see the most interesting innovations now. It's not just in technology or just in, you know, social media or just in healthcare. It's the intersection of these. And I think that, you know, thinking through problems in design education and how you bring these different viewpoints and pieces of a problem together are, you know, have always been important, but growing even more important. If I look at the team that I've built here at Catalia Health, it's people with, you know, backgrounds in specific disciplines, of course, but, you know, we've brought in people who understand how to work very well with people in different disciplines and have had that kind of experience. And I think that's what's important to creating these new types of, you know, interactive systems.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, do you have comments? Can we check your mic again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, and you sound fine.
This is better. Okay.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question for me because I'm in a state of confusion about this. And the reason why I'm in a state of confusion is because I think about this almost every day with relation to ID, and I think about what we are educating our students to become. I think the fetish for the polymath, the idea that you would be like Steve Jobs, or you know, if you're a product designer like Abe Bihar, or if you're even more ambitious like Da Vinci, I think that the fetish to become the polymath is driven our education process for a long time, and at ID we resist that in some sense. I think what's going to happen with design education is that students are going to start to realize that true innovation doesn't really come from an individual working together, individual working on his or her own terms, that it's going to come together with an alliance with other people, engineers and social scientists. And no one person can be really good at any one of those things, or all of those things put together, but the alliances that we create with the government officials, with policymakers, with technologists, and so on, is going to be the critical way to move forward. Now, the confusion arises because more and more of my students are exhibiting polymath abilities. They are able to shift and do more work across disciplines than in any one singular segment of the T. And this is where the confusion arises. So in my mind, I'm really not sure what the answer to your question is.
That's why we're doing the conversation. Skip.
Yeah.
Oh, there's probably 100 things, but if I had to pick one, it would be not taking people out of real workplaces to get educated. I think the technologies are on the horizon with VR and AR. Is keep people where they are and drop the education in, rather than bringing them into an environment where they're fundamentally divorced from the world, no matter how realistic the projects are. Because certainly the E part of the project, and I think the C part of the world, the cyber world, is relatively weak in design education, and yet the minute we throw people into my company or Corey's company or Nijo's company, they've got to be able to deal with all of those pieces. So I think that it's not so much creating a full polymath, but people have to be a lot deeper than they are today. And one of the ways to do that is be really in the middle of real projects.
It's interesting you say that, because of the various activities here at the Institute of Design, the one that is growing by far the fastest is executive education. These are short courses embedded in the companies, bringing relatively high-level design concepts and methods to them working on real projects. We're doing this in India, Europe, across North America, and it's amazing to see what a group of people who have never studied design can do if you give them 10 methods or frameworks and concentrate them on that, and what they can produce. Anijo and I are both very involved with the Godrej company in India in doing this, and it's amazing to see what people with relatively little training in design, how it can transform their normal work.
Well, I think one of the challenges of any graduate school is you miss the context. You start studying information for information's sake or for the knowledge's sake. One of the nice things about executive education is they've got the context, and now you give them the tools to apply in that context. So we've been, for lack of a better word, talking about how do we design the context boxes versus just shoveling content in 100 different ways and 100 different disguises. And that, I think, is why keeping or having people operate in real projects that have real economics is very different than made-up projects in a classroom.
Yes, a number of us here are working with a model that we call Whole View, which is looking not only at the offering and the user situation, but at the strategic and economic dimensions of the project and the operational ones, how it gets produced. And by developing ways of sketching the business model and sketching the operation model, like we sketch offerings and like we sketch user conditions, allows us to start thinking of those in a comprehensive way. It's core of what we're teaching in some of the corporate programs.
I mean, at ID, we also take our graduate students and immerse them into corporate and natural contexts as well. So not only do we bring the executives who are in context into educational, in business context into educational context, we take students who are in educational context and put them into business and social context.
So in a way, we're trying to deal with high theory and on-the-ground application at the same time. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you, guys. Any final words from any of you that you feel like you wanted to say but didn't get a chance to? I think it was remarkable in the different things you said, but there's some core elements that will be continued in the conversation we have at the strategy conference. Skip has been a speaker at that before, and Anijo and Corey will be speaking there this year. So we look forward to carrying this on then. Thank you very much, and thank you to the various viewers who have been going along with us in this last hour. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.